The sea had no right to be that still. Davos Seaworth had sailed through tempests that tossed ships like driftwood, had seen gales that tore canvas to rags, but the waters that cradled the smoking sea that night lay flat as hammered steel. The only movement was the shimmer of heat, liquid waves of distortion rising from the surface as if the ocean itself were a cauldron about to boil. "Too quiet," muttered one of the men behind him. "I heard the water screams here. Dragons under the surface, chewing on the bones of ships." "Shut your mouth and mind the lines," Davos said, not unkindly. His voice carried in the odd, thick calm. "Superstitions won't change what's under us." He wished they could. They had set sail from King's Landing on the King's business, bearing sealed letters to Volantis and Braavos, treaties and overtures written in Bran Stark's spare, careful hand. Davos had argued for a safer course, but the smoking sea was a straight cut across the world, and straight paths tempted kings pressed for time. So here he was again, on waters every sane sailor avoided. The air stank of rotten eggs and hot stone. It seeped into his beard and clothes, clung to his tongue. When Davos looked to starboard, he could just make out the dim gray line where boiling fog began, huddled low over the water like a crouching beast. Somewhere beneath that pall lay Old Valyria, or what was left of it, a graveyard of a civilization that had once ruled the world. "Ser Davos," called the captain, a lean man from Gulltown with a scarred jaw. "We're skirting as you asked. Charts say if we keep this bearing, we'll pass her bones by dawn and smell cleaner water by midday." Davos nodded, but his hand remained clenched on the rail. The wood was warm beneath his palm. Too warm. A faint tremor ran through the cog, subtle as a cat's shiver. Davos felt it in his feet, a vibration that seemed to rise from the depths, through oak and iron, through his boots and into his bones. "Did you feel that?" he asked. The captain frowned. "Feel what?" Before Davos could answer, the horizon flickered. A smear of dim red light pulsed within the distant mist, like the glow of a forge behind thick shutters. It flared once, twice, then faded almost to nothing, leaving ghost colors dancing in Davos's sight. He swallowed, suddenly thirsty despite the heavy air. "Wake every man who's got eyes," he said quietly, "and have them look east. I want witnesses, not sailors' tales." Men who had slept through storms came stumbling to the rail, rubbing grit from their eyes, drawn by curses and hoarse shouts. The deck creaked under the sudden weight, the ship's timbers complaining in low, anxious groans. "There," Davos said, his voice low but steady, pointing with two fingers toward the east. The fog bank that marked the smoking sea's heart was no longer just a smear of gray. It was alive, smoldering. Dull red light throbbed behind it in long, slow pulses, each one brightening the mist from within like a giant lung breathing fire and smoke. The glow picked out contours where before there had been only formless cloud. Ragged humps like collapsed hills, jagged columns thrusting upward, crooked as broken spears. "Mountains," one sailor breathed. "Ruin," said another. Davos said nothing. From somewhere deep below, the tremor came again, stronger this time. It made the rigging hum, made the lantern hooks rattle on the rail. Waves did not rise, not yet, but the water's surface quivered, disturbed by forces unseen. A sound reached them, faint but immense, like distant thunder caught underwater. It rolled across the flat sea in a slow wave, a hollow, grinding roar that seemed to bypass the ears and settle directly in the chest. Davos felt it between his ribs, a pressure that made his heart stutter. "Back the sails," the captain ordered suddenly, fear sharpening his tone. "We're close enough." They began to turn, men hauling on ropes with jerky, hurried motions, but the world ahead refused to stay quiet. The red light built, thickened, until the fog glowed like heated iron. Davos squinted against it, eyes watering, and in that moment the mist split, like curtains drawn apart by some colossal hand. The steaming vapors tore along a jagged line. Through the gap, Davos saw the impossible. Far, far off, too far for any man's comfort, yet near enough to imprint on the soul. rose a forest of towers. Black stone, glistening wet as if newly pulled from the ocean's depths, climbed into the dark sky. Some were broken, their tops sheared away. Others leaned at mad angles. Others still were whole clusters of slender spires fused at the base, reaching upward like fingers clutching at heaven. Between them, lit by the hellish glow from below, Davos glimpsed bridges of glassy rock, wide avenues suspended in the air. Rivers of molten light ran along channels chiseled into the stone, casting moving reflections on the tower's flanks. "Valyria!" someone gasped, the word torn from him. "Old Valyria!" The tremor became a shudder. The cog lurched beneath them, groaning, as if the sea itself were rearranging its bones. In the distance, one of the taller towers shook, shedding curtains of black debris, then jerked higher, rising another man's height, then another, as if some vast hand were pushing it up from below. The dead city is rising, Davos thought, and his mouth went dry. Water burst upward around the far-off city in a jagged ring, plumes of steam and scalding spray hissing skyward. For a heartbeat, it was only that, water and fire, the earth vomiting up its fury. Then the plumes thinned, streaming aside, and more of the city's skeleton was laid bare. Davos saw avenues that had once been streets, now half-submerged causeways of black stone. He saw the curved lip of a colossal amphitheater, its steps slick and shining. He saw the ribs of what might have been a bridge, arcing out over the water and ending abruptly, broken by the doom's ancient teeth. A roar rolled over them, louder than before. It was not just stone grinding against stone now, not just the wrath of the earth. It was something other, higher, edged with a sound Davos had heard before and never hoped to hear again. A dragon's cry. He lifted his eyes to the smoke-thick sky. At first he saw only the roiling clouds, stained red and orange by the glow beneath. Then, like shadows peeling free of the darkness, they appeared. One swept out from behind a leaning tower, wings beating sluggishly in the heavy air. Its body was vast, its hide the color of burned coal, shot through with veins of dull crimson light, as if the fire that had remade the city had seeped into its flesh. Another followed, leaner and lighter, scales shimmering like polished obsidian. "Dragons?" whispered the captain, off-flattening his voice. "By the mother!" The first dragon circled one of the taller towers, then tilted its wings and banked outward, toward the open sea. Its long neck snaked, head turning as if scenting something. Davos felt irrationally that it was looking at them, at him. "Hard to port," he said very softly. The captain did not argue. Men scrambled to obey, muscle and will straining as the cog began to wheel away from the nightmare vista. The water, however, had its own ideas. Waves were rising now, low, long swells that heaved the ship up and let it slide down again, building with each passing breath. Davos clung to the rail as the deck tipped beneath his boots. Behind them, the city pulsed with light, and dragons wheeled above it like sparks thrown from a forge. "Remember this," he told himself fiercely. "The way it looks, the way it smells, the way it feels under your feet. Don't let them call you a liar when you speak of it." He tore his eyes from the horizon and set his jaw. If the gods were kind, he would live to stand before Sansa Stark and Bran Stark, before Samwell Tarly and every maester in Old Town, and force them to reckon with the truth. Old Valyria was not dead. It was waking. Far from the boiling sea, fire burned in a different way. In Volantis, the Red Temple's great hall was a cavern of light and shadow. Flames leapt from braziers as large as wagons, their heat rolling over the crowd packed shoulder to shoulder beneath the towering statue of the Lord of Light. Smoke curled toward the rafters in lazy streams, veiling the stone god's stern features, making his carved eyes seem to blink. "Brothers and sisters," cried Bonero, voice carrying easily over the low murmur. "Heed the tidings brought by flame and ash." He wore the same colors as the fire, reds from rust to wine, gold thread glinting like embers in his sleeves. Age had bowed his back, but not dimmed his eyes. They shone as bright as any brazier as he raised a hand and beckoned an acolyte forward. The boy held a scrap of cloth between careful fingers. Once, it had been a ship's banner, embroidered with some lord's sigil. Now it was blackened along one edge, heat twisted, the colors warped. "They came from the west," Bonero said, his voice dropping into a cadence that made the crowd lean forward. "Sailors whose ship kissed the edge of the cursed waters. They brought this, and they brought tales of fire in the fog, of towers rising where once there were only ghosts." He turned toward the nearest brazier. Flames leapt higher, tongues of orange and white reaching hungrily for the smoke-dark dome above. Bonero stared into them, the hall falling utterly silent save for the crackle of burning wood. "In the flames I see the mother of cities," he said, his tone almost reverent now. "Old Valyria shaking off her shroud. I see dragons, reborn in the heart of the world. And I see," his lips thinned, sweat beaded on his brow, though the heat had not changed. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, strained. "I see a man of the cold, with a direwolf's shadow and a dragon's fire. A man with a bastard's name and a king's blood, a sword of the dawn that walks in night." A rustle went through the crowd like wind through tall grass. "A wolf with a dragon's heart," Bonero murmured, more to himself than to them. "The flames do not show his face clearly, but they whisper a name from the far north. Snow. They hiss, like embers dying on ice." He closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the brazier until his fingers whitened. When he opened them again, he seemed older. "The world turns," he said, lifting his head. "The doom that was returns in new guise. Pray, children of the fire. Pray that when Old Valyria rises, it finds a hand strong enough to guide it, and a heart tender enough not to burn us all." The citadel smelled of dust and ink and old stone. It was a smell Samwell Tarly had grown to love, even when it made him sneeze. He wiped his nose on his sleeve as he broke the seal on the letter. The wax crumbled under his thumb, the impression of the crowned stag and leaping direwolf flaking away in red crumbs. Bran Stark's chosen sigil, stamped over parchment that had flown across half a world on tired wings. Gilly would be in their small chamber now, coaxing little Sam to his letters by lamplight. Sam pictured them as he unfolded the parchment, her hair escaping its braid, the boy's tongue sticking out as he traced clumsy shapes. The thought steadied him. His eyes skimmed the careful script, and for a moment he thought he had misread. He went back to the beginning. Archmaester Samwell, Bran had written. Still felt strange, seeing the title before his name. "Reports have reached us from a ship sailing the edge of the Smoking Sea. Lord Davos Seaworth confirms strange disturbances. Lights, tremors, shapes in the mists that suggest rising stone. I require your judgment. Seek what knowledge the Citadel holds regarding any prophecy or record of Old Valyria stirred anew." Sam swallowed, his heart giving a queer little hop. "Old Valyria," he said aloud, tasting the words. They seemed to thicken the air. He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping the flagstones, and went to a high shelf, fingers already mapping remembered paths. He had read so much since coming here, about things that had happened and things that might. The doom of Valyria, the fall of dragons, the long night that had nearly swallowed the world. Some nights he dreamed of fire and shadows, of Jon Snow standing on a field of corpses, eyes full of stubborn grief. Not now, he told himself, shoving the memories aside. This was different. This was not some king's mad fancy or a priest's fevered vision. This was Davos Seaworth, a man Sam trusted, writing of towers rising from the sea. His hand closed on a leather-bound volume cracked from age. He laid it on the table and opened it carefully, pages whispering as they turned. Symbols, cramped Valyrian script, marginal notes in the hands of long-dead maesters. There, near the bottom of a page dense with prophecy and speculation. "When the city of sorrows shakes off its shroud," Sam read softly, "the blood of dragons will be tested, and all the world will burn or be reborn." He stared at the words until they blurred. Somewhere, far above, a bell told the hour. The other maesters moved in and out of the room, rustling gray and gold, But in Sam's mind, the world had narrowed to a city of black stone rising from a red sea, and to a friend with a bastard's name and a dragon's blood, somewhere beyond the wall. "I hope you're safe, Jon," he whispered. "Seven save us all. I hope you're safe." Valyria Mager woke before the bells, heart pounding, sweat cold on her skin despite the furs piled around her. The dream clung to her like cobwebs, heat and shadow, towers like spears of night, the sensation of standing on a bridge that stretched out over nothing. She swung her legs from the bed and stood, bare feet silent on the polished floor. Outside, pigeons cooed on the windowsill. Somewhere below, a barge's pole thunked against stone. The city was waking slowly, yawning its way toward dawn. She crossed to the balcony and pushed the doors open. Cold air kissed her face, sharp with salt and canal muck. The sky above Bravos was washed in the first gray of morning, but far to the east, beyond the glittering line of the sea, there was a faint smear of red, as if someone had brushed the horizon with a coal-dusted thumb. Valyria gripped the balcony's carved stone. Her fingers trembled. Her family had come to Bravos generations ago, fleeing something no one agreed quite what. Some said they had been minor Dragonlords, cast out after a failed coup. Others whispered of forbidden sorceries, of bloodlines too tangled even for Old Valyria's taste. Whatever the truth, the Magers had traded dragons for counting houses and salt barges, for quiet influence behind masked smiles. Yet sometimes, in polished mirrors or still water, Valyria saw more than a Bravosi noblewoman looking back. She saw the echo of another face, one lit by the red of flowing lava, eyes reflecting a sky choked with ash. This morning, the echo felt stronger. She raised a hand, shading her eyes against the weak light. The red smear did not brighten, did not pulse like the fires of a rising sun. It simply sat there, a bruise on the horizon. In her dream, she had stood upon a balcony not unlike this one, but the air had been thick and burning. Below, a city had stretched in all directions, its streets radiant with molten light, dragons wheeling between towers. A voice had called from somewhere she could not see, speaking in High Valyrian, a tongue her tutors had taught her only for the sake of old contracts and ancient songs. "Come home, child of embers," it had said. "The mother of cities rises." Valyria shivered so hard her teeth clicked. Behind her, the curtains billowed as a stray gust slipped into the room. It stirred the tapestry hanging on the far wall, an old, faded thing her grandfather had forbidden anyone to sell. She did not need to look at it to know what it showed. A city of impossible beauty, all black glass and white fire, dragons like shards of night against the sky. Old Valyria. Dreams, she told the empty room. Only dreams. Yet her hand, still resting on cold stone, felt warm in one spot, as if the rock itself were remembering another life, another heat. As she stood there, listening to the first bell ring across the canals, Valyria Mager realized she was not the only one dreaming. Something else had woken, out there beyond the Titan's watchful gaze. Winterfell felt quieter in the mornings now. The rush and noise of war had faded into the steady rhythms of a castle that meant to endure. Sansa Stark walked across the courtyard, boots crunching on old snow. Her cloak was heavy on her shoulders, wolf fur warming the back of her neck, but the cold still nipped at her fingers where they clutched the letter. The wax seal had already been broken. She had read the words twice in her solar, then once again by the window, watching the sky pale over the godswood. Samwell Tarly's hand was neat but hurried. The maester's chain had not changed him that much, it seemed. She could almost hear him stammering apologies between the lines, as if embarrassed to be bringing her such tidings. Another raven? Arya Stark's voice came from her left, dry as the winter air. Sansa did not start. Her sister had a way of appearing where she willed, like a cat slipping through cracks in the walls. Sansa had grown used to it. She turned her head to look at her. Arya in leathers and worn boots, her hair shorter now, eyes sharp. "From the Citadel," Sansa said. "From Sam." "That's rarely good news," Arya observed. "Books and trouble usually go together." They passed under the shadow of the inner gatehouse, stepping into the dim warmth of the great hall's entrance. The smell of banked fires and last night's ale greeted them. Servants moved between trestle tables, clearing away wooden trenchers and stacking benches. "It's strange," Sansa said. The word felt insufficient. She held the parchment out to Arya. "Read." Arya took it without protest, her brow furrowing as she scanned the lines. Her lips moved soundlessly, tracing Sam's careful phrasing. Reports from the Smoking Sea, from Lord Davos Seaworth, from sailors who spoke of lights and tremors and shapes in the fog. Old Valyria mentioned not as history, but as possibility. When she finished, she folded the letter once more and handed it back. "So the dead city wakes," Arya said. "We've seen stranger things." "Stranger, yes," Sansa replied. "But this?" She shook her head. "If it's true, the balance of the world may change. Dragons rule from the grave, Arya. They always have. Their stories are enough. And if they stop being just stories?" Arya asked. Sansa looked toward the high table, imagining banners she could not see from here. The direwolf of House Stark, King Bran's standard with its crowned stag and leaping wolf, the broken wheel of Daenerys Targaryen, folded and put away. The North had fought hard to carve out a place where it could breathe. "If Old Valyria rises," she said slowly, "its lords will look west. They always did. And when they do, they may remember a boy named Jon Snow, who saved a world that never thanked him." Arya's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "He isn't a boy anymore," she said. "And he isn't just Jon Snow." "No," Sansa agreed softly. "But whatever name he wears, they may seek him. And we should be ready when they do." The Godswood was never truly silent. Even in deepest winter, when snow lay thick and the pool iced over, there were sounds. The creak of old branches, the faint crackle of sap freezing and thawing, the whisper of the wind threading itself through red leaves. Bran Stark sat beneath the heart tree and listened to all of it, and to things far beyond. He felt the bark against the back of his neck, cool and damp, the faint stickiness of sap where it touched his skin. His hands lay folded in his lap, the furs over his legs arranged carefully by a serving boy who had long since retreated, unnerved by the sight of the king alone with his white-faced god. Bran's eyes were open, but they did not see the Godswood as other men saw it. They looked outward and inward all at once, past branches and sky and the stone of Winterfell's walls. He heard the sea long before he saw it, a distant, endless roar, like a great beast muttering in its sleep. Not the choppy, dutiful crash of waves on the western shores, nor the ice-laden grind of the shivering sea. This was thicker, deeper, flavored with heat. The world shifted. Snow became smoke. The cold air grew hot and acrid. Bran's breath quickened in a body that did not move. In his mind, he flew. He soared above a vast expanse of water that steamed and boiled, tendrils of mist writhing upward like pale serpents. Within it, something stirred. He saw shadows beneath the surface, long and dark, the shapes of streets and buildings buried in a watery grave. Then movement. Stone rose, not as men built it with scaffolds and sweat, but all at once, as if the world were correcting an omission. Towers thrust upward through the water, shedding cataracts of steam. Bridges emerged half-formed, their broken edges jagged, molten light gleaming along carved channels. Dragons circled the freshly bared spires, their wings stirring the ash-laden air. Their cries were shards of sound, sharp enough to pierce the sky. Old Valyria, Bran thought, though the words were more echo than voice, the mother of cities. He let himself drift higher, looking down upon the reborn ruin. Threads of time spread out from it in all directions, possibilities weaving and unweaving. Some showed ships burning on red seas, others armies marching under banners of black and red. In more than one, he saw a man with a sword of living fire, standing alone upon a tower's peak. In many, he saw Jon Snow, a wolf of the north, with a dragon's blood singing in his veins and the weight of the world in his eyes. Sometimes he wore black, sometimes red, sometimes both. Sometimes he was crowned, sometimes he was alone. The city called to him. Bran could feel it the way one might feel a thought pressing at the back of the skull. Old Valyria remembered dragons, and it reached now for the one who had walked between life and death with a dragon's name on his tongue. Bran blinked, and the gods would came back into focus. The heart tree's carved face, the darkening sky beyond its branches. He exhaled slowly, mist blooming in the cooling air. "Very well," he said, though no one stood to hear him. "If you are waking, let us see what you mean to be." Somewhere beyond the wall, he knew Jon Snow would have felt it too. Perhaps only as a shiver in the bones, a dream half remembered upon waking. But the call had gone out, and things that woke in the depths of the world did not go easily back to sleep. The sky beyond the wall had more colors than most Southerners ever saw. Greens and blues and ghostly whites, ribbons of light that undulated and twisted, making patterns that never quite repeated. Tonight there was red as well. Jon Snow watched the aurora flare above the dark treeline, the usual cool hues stained by a faint wash of rusty light along the distant horizon. It might have been a trick of his eyes, or of the fire that crackled at his feet, but the color made his skin crawl under his furs. "Brooding again," Tormund Giantsbane observed, dropping down on the log beside him hard enough to make it creak. Snow dust flew from his beard. "You'll wear a hole straight through the night if you stare at it long enough." Jon half smiled. "Just watching," he said. His hand fell automatically to Ghost's head, fingers sinking into thick white fur. The direwolf huffed quietly, eyes slitting, ears pricked toward the dark. "Watching what?" Tormund snorted. "Lights in the sky? They've been here longer than either of us. They'll be here after we're bones." "Maybe," Jon said. Tormund followed his gaze, squinting. "Ah," he grunted. "You mean the red. Looks like someone spilled wine across the stars." He shrugged. "North is strange. That's why I like it." Laughter rose from the circle of free folk around the nearest fire. Someone had started a song, voices rough but not unkind. Children chased each other between the tents, their boots kicking up powder, cheeks flushed. Jon took it in with a quiet sense of distance, as if he were watching a memory that belonged to someone else. He had died and come back once. He had killed a queen and watched a city burn. Exile had not changed those facts. Beyond the wall, he was freer than he had ever been, but he was also nowhere. Ghost shifted, a low rumble starting in his chest. Jon's hand stilled. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. The direwolf's eyes, pale as winter, fixed on the red-stained horizon. For a moment, Jon could almost taste something on the air, metallic, like old blood, and hot stone. A memory tried to rise. A great shadow passing over him, a roar that shook his teeth. Rhaegal's wings beating the air above Winterfell. Drogon's scream over King's Landing. He closed his eyes briefly, as if he could shut the echoes out. The red in the sky pulsed against his eyelids. "Come drink," Tormund said, clapping a large hand on his shoulder. "It's too cold for this much thinking." "In a bit," Jon answered, when the others drifted away, leaving him alone with Ghost and the softly hissing fire. He leaned forward, rubbing his hands together for warmth that never quite sank in. The call, when it came, was not a sound, exactly. It was a pressure at the base of his skull, a warmth under his ribs. It made his heartbeat stutter, then quicken, as if answering a summons. Jon frowned, eyes narrowing on the dark line of the far-off sky. "Do you feel that?" he asked Ghost. The dire wolf lifted his head fully now, muscles tensing, a soft whine rising between his teeth. Something had shifted in the world. Jon Snow did not yet know what it was, but he felt suddenly, absurdly certain of one thing. Whatever it was, it had begun far to the south and east, in a place he had only heard of in old tales. Old Valyria, he thought, and the name tasted like ash. Sleep took him like a wave, sudden and overwhelming. One moment Jon Snow was staring at the dying embers of the fire. The next, the world had shifted beneath his feet. He stood on stone that was not stone as he knew it. The bridge beneath him was smooth as glass, black and glossy, yet warm through the soles of his boots. It arched out over a vast drop, connecting one towering spire to another. Far below, rivers of molten rock crawled between the bases of countless buildings, their ruddy light throwing moving patterns on the underside of the bridges. The air was thick and hot, full of ash that did not settle. It swirled around him in lazy spirals, every breath tasting of cinders and metal. Ghost was there too. The direwolf's fur glowed faintly in the red light, picking up hues that did not belong to snow or storm. He paced along the edge of the bridge, peering down into the chasms between towers with wary curiosity, ears flat. Jon's clothes were wrong. His hand brushed over black leather worked with subtle patterns of twisting dragons, over furs that were cut in a fashion he had never seen but somehow felt familiar, as if he had once worn them in a life that wasn't his. Longclaw hung at his hip, the old Valyrian steel drinking in the red glow and giving nothing back, its pommel, reshaped long ago into a wolf's head, cool against his palm. He moved to the edge of the bridge and looked out. The city stretched in every direction, a labyrinth of spires and walkways, of domes and towers, some whole, others cracked or half-collapsed. Lava ran in ordered channels, casting the streets in a perpetual twilight of orange and red. Dragons wheeled above it all, their shadows skimming across stone and fire alike. Old Valyria, the thought came, heavy and undeniable. This is Old Valyria. He should not have known it, yet he did, the way one recognizes a face only seen in dreams. The stories had not done it justice. No song sung in the halls of Winterfell, no half-remembered account muttered over a maester's tome, could capture the enormity of it. A roar split the heated air. One of the dragons banked sharply, angling its flight toward him. It was vast, its wingspan blotting out portions of the city as it passed, scales the black of burned bone. Its eyes glowed like coals as it swept nearer, wind from its passage whipping ash into a frenzy. Ghost bristled, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Jon's hand fell to Longclaw's hilt, though some part of him knew a sword, even one of Valyrian steel, would be less than a toothpick to such a beast. The dragon slowed as it approached, great wings beating the air in measured strokes. It hovered before the bridge for a long heartbeat, studying him. Jon felt the weight of that gaze, ancient and assessing, as if the creature were looking not at his face but through it, at everything he had done and everything he might yet do. When it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged was not the scream he expected. It was softer, stranger, a series of low, resonant notes that reverberated in his chest more than in his ears. The words, when they came, did not pass through air. They bloomed directly in his mind. Come, child of ice and fire. The city seemed to listen. The lava's light pulsed in time with the words. Towers trembled, shedding flakes of ash. Jon's throat worked. Where? He managed, the word rough in his own ears. Home, the voice replied, and in that single word was 1,000 contradictions. Warmth and terror, belonging and danger, an embrace that might also be a noose. The bridge stretched out behind him, leading deeper into the forest of towers. In the distance, he thought he saw figures moving. Shadows on balconies, silhouettes at windows, all of them turned, watching him. Some felt old, older than memory. Others felt new, as if they had only just stepped into being. The dragon's wings beat once, twice. Ash whirled around him, stinging his eyes. When he blinked, the city swam, towers bending like reeds in a wind. Come, the voice said again, more insistent now. The mother of cities rises. We wake and we remember you. Jon tried to step back, but his boots would not move. The bridge held him as surely as shackles. Ghost pressed against his leg, a solid weight in the whirling heat. Jon reached down blindly, fingers tangling in thick fur, and clung. The direwolf's presence anchored him, a line back to snow and cold and nights under auroras. I have a home, Jon said, though whether he spoke aloud or only in his own mind, he could not tell. I have done my duty. I have no crown, no place among your... The word caught. Dragonlords. He did not want to say it, but the city seemed to whisper it for him, a hiss through every crack and crevice. "You are blood of the fire," the voice murmured, almost tender. "You walked in death and returned. You ended a queen of dragons and spared a world. You are owed. Come and take what is yours." The heat surged. The lava rivers flared white at their cores, light lancing upward between the towers. The dragon threw back its head and roared, a sound that shook the bridge, shook the sky, rattled Jon's bones. He woke with a gasp, heart hammering, breath tearing at his throat. The world snapped back into cold. He was on his bed of furs in the crude tent, Ghost curled at his side, the dire wolf already awake, watching him with intent, worried eyes. Outside, the camp murmured in its sleep. A distant owl hooted once. The sky beyond the tent flap was still tinged faintly red along the horizon. Jon raised a trembling hand to his face. His skin was cool, damp with sweat, but beneath his palm he fancied he could feel residual warmth, as if the dream's heat had seeped into him. "Old Valyria," he whispered to the dark, the word a ghost in the cold air. Ghost laid his head on Jon's chest, the weight of him steady and real. Jon closed his eyes again, but he did not expect sleep to come. Somewhere across the world, a city of black stone and living fire had opened its eyes, and, for reasons he did not yet understand, it had seen him. The throne room had changed, but the way men looked up at a king had not. Gone were the swords of the conquered, melted down and carted away, the twisted mass of blades that had drunk the blood of kings and pretenders alike. In their place, a dais of plain stone rose a few steps from the floor, wide and unadorned, save for a chair fashioned of dark northern wood and wrapped in furs. The chair cradled a wheeled frame, its occupant small and pale against the heavy pelts. Bran Stark sat with his hands folded in his lap, fingers still, eyes unfocused in a way that made some men shift their feet and look away. Tyrion Lannister stood just off his right shoulder, hands clasped neatly, expression polite and carefully unreadable. Davos Seaworth knelt at the base of the steps, the sea still clinging to him, the smell of brine and tar, the salt stains on his cloak. He had washed, out of respect for the presence he now faced, but the journey hung about him regardless, an invisible fog of distance and danger. "Rise, Lord Davos," Tyrion said. Davos did, joints cracking faintly. He felt the eyes of the hall on him. Lords with thin blood and softer hands, southern knights who had never seen a ship pitch under them in a black storm. They watched him as if he were a man come back from the grave. Perhaps he was, in a way. Most ships that ventured near the Smoking Sea did not return at all. "You've sailed a path no sane man chooses," Tyrion continued, the faintest suggestion of wryness in his voice. "We're eager to hear whether the old tales are as terrifying as the songs claim." "They're worse," Davos said. The words fell into the hall like small stones into deep water. Ripples spread, murmurs, the rustle of cloth, the clink of a chain against armor. Above it all, Bran Stark's gaze sharpened, focusing on him as if it had only been pretending distraction. "Tell me," Bran said. His voice was quiet, but the hall stilled around it. Davos swallowed, throat dry. He had rehearsed his account on the voyage home, going over each detail, each sensation, as if he were setting them down in a ledger. Now that he stood beneath the high windows, with the sun slanting in and catching at dust motes like tiny stars, the memory rose in him with such force that for a heartbeat he tasted ash instead of dust. "We skirted the edge of the Smoking Sea, as his grace commanded," Davos began, "just close enough to mark its borders on our charts anew. The waters were wrong, too still, too warm." He let his gaze flick briefly to Tyrion, then back to Bran. "We felt tremors, my king, not waves or storm swell, shuddering from the deep. Then the fog ahead lit." He described the pulses of red light, the way the mist had glowed, the trembling of the ship's bones. He spoke of towers emerging where there had been only stories, black spires slick with water, bridges suspended in the air, lava running like molten gold along carved channels. He told them about the dragons, their scales and their cries, and the way one had turned its head as if to look directly upon their little ship. He left nothing out. Men might call him a liar regardless, but he would not give them the excuse. When he finished, the hall was silent. Even the banners along the walls seemed to hang more heavily, their colors muted in the thin autumn light. "A city," Tyrion said at last, voice quiet. "Not ruins, not shattered remnants under smoke, but a city rising from the sea." "Aye," Davos replied. "Old Valyria, or what's left of her. A lord with a deep green cloak embroidered in gold trees." One of the Reachmen, still clinging to their pride, snorted. "Impossible," he said. "The doom was final. The Maesters are writing new books as we speak." Tyrion cut in, a faint edge under the politeness. "And the king's ravens have brought letters from the citadel that speak of tremors and prophecies, not certainties. Best not cling to the comfort of old parchments when the world is busy rewriting itself." Bran said nothing for a long moment. His eyes, though, were not on Davos. They seemed fixed on a point far beyond the far wall, beyond the city, beyond the sea. Davos had seen that look once before, during the War for the Living, when the boy who was now king had stared into a firelit darkness and spoken of things that had not yet come to pass. "Old Valyria is waking," Bran said at last. "I have seen it." The murmur that followed was sharper this time, laced with unease. "How far will it reach, this waking?" Tyrion asked, watching the king's face as one might watch clouds for the shape of a storm. "If dragons are circling its towers, if towers are rising from the depths, what does that mean for us?" Bran's gaze focused again on Davos, as if the old sailor were a point he could anchor to. "It means," the king said softly, "that a man who is not here will soon need to be." The small council chamber had always suited Tyrion Lannister better than any throne room. There was comfort in a table between himself and the rest of the world, in walls lined with shelves instead of men with swords. The chairs had changed since Cersei's day. Fewer gilded monstrosities, more sturdy oak. But the long table remained, scarred with the indentations of old feasts and new plans. Candles burned in iron sconces along the walls, their light flickering over maps, open ledgers, the occasional bottle of decent wine. Tyrion stood at the head of the table, fingers resting near the hilt of a quill. Davos Seaworth leaned on the opposite edge, arms folded, his eyes tracing the red-encircled patch of parchment where the smoking sea lay. The maester the citadel had sent down. Maester Corran, pale and thin as the paper he loved so much, hovered near, a roll of scrolls tucked under one arm. Bronn of the Blackwater sat in a chair along the side, boots up on a neighboring seat, expression 1 part boredom to 2 parts calculation. The new Lord of Highgarden had a talent for making even looming catastrophe look like an inconvenience. "So," Bronn said, swirling wine in his cup, "the dead city's crawling out of its grave, dragons are flapping about where they ought not, and the sea's having fits. Why is this our problem again? Because when great powers stir, smaller folk tend to get crushed underfoot," Tyrion answered, tapping the map lightly. Old Valyria did not content itself with ruling a single city. The freehold once spanned half the known world. If what Davos saw is more than a spasm of the earth, if it is the beginning of return, then we are not merely watching some distant wonder. We're watching a conqueror lace its boots. "Conquerors need armies," Bronn said. "Ships, grain, gold. Dragons are fine for roasting the front line, but they don't garrison keeps." Old Valyria forged chains of power that were not measured only in spears and ships. Maester Corran put in, voice thin but earnest. They had spells, oaths, bindings that tied whole cities to their will. And dragons, of course. Always dragons. Davos grunted. "Spells or no, I saw towers rising where they shouldn't be and beasts in the sky that could burn fleets to cinders. If they look west and remember they once held sway here, they will find a very different Westeros than the one their ancestors knew," Tyrion said. "No Targaryen dynasty, no Iron Throne. A north that refuses to bend. A king who sees more than any man should." He let his gaze flick toward the door, where a guard waited, still and silent. And they may find one more thing, Tyrion added. A man with their blood who has already faced the end of the world and won. You mean Jon Snow, Davos said, not as a question. Jon Targaryen, Maester Corran corrected reflexively, then colored as 3 sets of eyes turned on him. Aya, that is, the records we have from the last war, the testimony of Samwell Tarly. Call him what you like, Bronn said. He's halfway to a ghost beyond the wall and likely meaner for it. Not exactly the sort to come running because some city on the far side of the world burped. He may have no choice, Tyrion said quietly. The king believes Old Valyria is not simply rising. It is reaching. If it is, and if it can pull at the blood of dragons still in the world, then Jon Snow will feel it. Davos finished, thinking of the red stain on the northern sky, of how the world had seemed to draw breath before the city revealed itself. Tyrion nodded once. I mean to send ravens north, he said. From here, from Winterfell, from the Citadel, from anywhere a bird can carry ink and warning. But ravens might not be enough. The free folk are not ones for letter reading. We may need something stronger. Someone stronger. Davos straightened. He had sailed halfway around the world and back more times than he cared to count. He had smuggled onions and fought in king's wars. He had seen Davos Seaworth, the smuggler, become Lord Davos, the Hand, then advisor to kings who actually listened. I'll go, he said simply. Tyrion met a gaze. There was gratitude there and relief and something like apology. You've crossed seas for kings before, Tyrion said. I, Davos replied, and this one may be the last time. But if Old Valyria is truly waking, I'd sooner have Jon Snow on our side than leave him staring at strange skies and wondering. The ravens came in pairs, as if the sky itself had doubled its messengers out of urgency. Sansa Stark watched the second bird hop along the back of a chair as the maester untied the scrap of parchment from its leg. The first message lay weighed down on the table before her by a wooden trencher. The ink was still drying where her fingers had smudged it, reading too quickly. The Iron Keep speaks of Old Valyria rising, that one had said in Bran Stark's hand. I have seen it. Davos Seaworth confirms it with his own eyes. The world may tilt once more. The second was shorter, written in Tyrion Lannister's small, precise script. She recognized the hand even before her mind supplied the name. Years had not dulled its particular neatness, though there were more ink blots now, as if his hand trembled more often. Sansa took the parchment from the maester and scanned it. Her eyes caught on names: Davos, Maester Corran, Old Valyria, dragons. Then on another, Jon Snow. He is not forgotten, Tyrion had written. The king believes Valyria may seek him. If so, Westeros must be ready. Winterfell must be ready. I know the north has little reason to trust the south, but Jon Snow has always been yours as much as ours. Speak with your lords. Decide what you will do when the world comes calling for him again. She read it twice, letting the lines settle like snow. Bad news? Arya Stark asked lightly, though Sansa heard the tension under the words. News, Sansa replied. Whether it's bad or merely dangerous remains to be seen. She slid the letter toward her sister. Arya plucked it up, eyes moving more quickly than Sansa's had. Arya had never bothered with courtly slowness. Her lips shaped the words silently, jaw tightening once, then again. Old Valyria, Arya said, dropping the parchment back to the table. Rising from the sea, dragons over its towers. Jon Snow's name in the same breath. She snorted. Of course. Northern lords clustered at the lower tables watched them with thinly veiled anxiety. The words filtering through the hall tasted like legend. Doom, Freehold, Dragonlords. These men had fought the dead, had seen giants and wights and dragons already. Their fears were no longer of fairy stories. That did not make the idea of a reborn Valyria easier to swallow. He bought our lives with his, one of them said quietly to another. Jon Snow did. If this city wants him, perhaps we should let them have him and be done. Sansa heard it easily. The great hall carried whispers like gossip. She did not react outwardly. Her fingers found the carved edge of her chair and held. Jon Snow is not a token to be handed over, she said, not lifting her voice but projecting it all the same. The murmurs snipped off. He is my brother. He is the North's, as much as any man can belong to a place. And he is a Targaryen, someone else said, bolder now that the question was open. Whatever name he used, the blood of Dragonlords runs in him. If Old Valyria calls, perhaps he is meant to answer. Arya's hand dropped to rest lightly on Needle's hilt. Her eyes glittered. Say it plain, she said. You're afraid that if they want him and we hold him, their dragons will come for us. Arya, Sansa murmured, but there was no real rebuke in it. She rose, the motion slow and deliberate. The hall, accustomed now to her measured grace, quieted further. Firelight painted her hair copper and gold, warming the cool planes of her face. We have faced dragons before, Sansa said. We have faced the Night King and his army of the dead. The North did not shatter then. It will not shatter now. But we must be wise. She laid a hand on the letters. The king writes that Old Valyria may seek Jon Snow. I believe him. She met Arya's gaze. And if it does, I would rather Jon hear of it from us, with time to choose his path, than wake one night to find a dragon shadowing Tata camp and wonder why we stayed silent. Arya considered that, the corner of her mouth twitching. Ravens won't reach him easily, she said. Not beyond the wall. Not to where he keeps himself hidden. Then perhaps ravens are not enough. Sansa's eyes went to the door, where the cold waited beyond stone. We may have to send more than ink and feathers. The raven found them on a day like any other beyond the wall, which meant a day shaped by cold and the slow labor of survival. Jon Snow trudged through the snow at Tormund Giantsbane's side, boots sinking to the ankle with each step. The free folk had learned to keep their camps light and their routes flexible. They shifted like wolves following herds, never lingering too long in one place. The old enemy was gone. The dead no longer walked, but the land remained as unforgiving as ever. You see that line of trees? Tormund said, pointing ahead with his staff. Beyond it, there's a hollow that holds less wind. We'll set tents there tonight. Good spot. Solid. Might even piss without the wind whipping it back in your face. Jon grunted, which Tormund took for agreement. The big man's laugh rolled out, startling a pair of nearby children, who squealed and pelted him with handfuls of loose snow. He roared back in mock fury, scooping one up and slinging her over his shoulder until her shrieks turned to giggles. It was a good life, or at least a clean one. Hard work, hard ground, hard choices. No thrones, no crowns, no crowds of eyes weighing his every move. Jon had begun to believe, cautiously, that it might be all he had left and all he needed. The raven's cry knifed through the camp's low murmur. Jon looked up automatically, hand rising to shade his eyes. The bird was black against the washed-out sky, wings beating with purposeful regularity. It circled once, twice, then angled downward, toward the roughly lashed pole they had set up as a makeshift rookery outside the main tent. Your friends from the south still remember you, Tormund said dryly. How sweet. Jon felt his jaw tighten. Not necessarily from the south. Could be from Eastwatch. From Castle Black. Could be from the moon's backside for all I care, Tormund said. Still a bird. Still a message. You going to ignore it? Jon thought. He could turn away, keep walking toward the hollow, let someone else deal with ink and questions. The raven would squawk and peck and ruffle its feathers until it flew away again, offended. The words tied to its leg would remain unread, mere shapes on parchment. But that would not change the fact that they had been written, or that someone somewhere still thought to send them. He left Tormund to direct the settling of the camp and crossed the churned snow toward the tent. Ghost rose from where he had been lying, a white shadow materializing from the lee of a drift, and fell into step beside him. The raven had landed by the time Jon reached the pole. It hopped along the crossbeam, head cocked, eyes sharp and beady. A strip of parchment clung to its leg, tied in place with competent, unremarkable knots. Jon reached up. The bird snapped at his fingers, but he closed his hand around it gently but firmly, ignoring the sting. Ghost bared his teeth in a silent warning that hushed the raven's objections to disgruntled clicks. The parchment crackled as Jon worked it free. He let the bird go. It flapped to a nearby rock and began to preen its ruffled feathers, offended by the entire process. Jon unrolled the strip with clumsy, cold-stiff fingers. At first the ink seemed a blur, but the letters resolved themselves quickly, as if his mind were more eager than his eyes to understand. The North must be warned, it began, in a hand he knew well. His heart gave a painful lurch. Sansa's script was more precise than it had been when they were children, but he would have known it in a field of 100. Words followed: Old Valyria, rising. Dragons, seen. Letters from the king and his hand. The citadel's murmurs. Bran's visions. We do not know what it wants, Sansa had written, but the king believes it may seek those of dragon blood. I will not have me taken unawares again, Jon. You deserve to choose your road, not be dragged down it. Jon's hands shook by the time he reached the end. Ghost pressed closer, the direwolf's shoulder solid against his thigh. What do they say? Tormund asked, striding up. Snow clung to his beard like crumbs in a drunk's whiskers. Jon read the letter again silently, buying himself a few more heartbeats before the world shifted. Old tales, he said finally. Old Valyria. They say it's rising. That dragons fly over it again. Tormund blinked. Well, seems the world wasn't done being mad after all. He squinted at the parchment. And what do they want from me? Another war? Another dead king? They don't know yet. Jon folded the letter carefully, as if it were something fragile. But Bran thinks that the city might want something from me. Tormund snorted. Cities don't want things. People in cities do. What is it with you southern types? Always giving stones and chairs and crowns a mind of their own. Jon did not answer. In his dreams, the city had felt as alive as any man. More so. He slipped the letter into his inner pocket, close to his skin, where the warmth of his body might keep the ink from cracking. Whatever it wants, he said, more to Ghost than to Tormund. I'd sooner hear it from my own kin first. The weirwood north of the camp was smaller than the one in Winterfell's Godswood, its trunk less massive, its face carved in lines less sure. But it was old all the same, and its roots sank deep into the frozen earth. Jon Snow had not sought it out for years. The old gods had never demanded temples or tithes. They lived in wind and water and stone, in snow and in the creak of branches. He had spoken to them once as a boy, kneeling in the Godswood of Winterfell, then later as a man with a sword and a burden. More often than not, they had answered with silence. Tonight, he went to the tree anyway. He left the camp quietly, taking only Ghost, who needed no invitation. The wind slid around him in thin, cold hands, tugging at his cloak. The sky above was a smeared canvas of aurora and cloud, the faint red stain still hovering low on the horizon, like an old wound that refused to fade. The weirwood stood in a shallow hollow, its roots gripping the earth like knotted fingers. Snow clung to its white bark. Red leaves rattled softly as Jon approached, the sound like dry whispers. He stopped a pace from the trunk and looked up into the carved face. The eyes, painted red ages ago, seemed to peer back at him with patient indifference. He had no prayers ready, no words polished by septons or priests. He had never been taught how to talk to gods, old or new, beyond simple honesty. You're not much for answers, he said, his breath a faint plume in the air. But you've seen plenty. You've seen me die and come back. Seen me break oaths and make new ones. Seen the world end and begin again. He flexed his fingers once, then reached out and laid his gloved hand on the bark. Old Valyria is waking, Jon said softly. If that's some game of men and dragons, I want no part in it. I gave everything once. I don't have anything left worth taking. The bark beneath his palm was cold. Then slowly it was not. A warmth seeped into his skin, subtle at first, then spreading, like the memory of summer. Ghost whined, low in his throat, pressing against Jon's leg. The weirwood's carved eyes seemed to deepen, the red darkening, as if fresh sap had begun to flow. Jon tried to take his hand back, but his fingers would not obey. The world narrowed to the feel of bark under his palm and the faint pulse he fancied he could feel there, like a heartbeat. Snow vanished, replaced by a rushing sensation, as if he had stepped off a cliff and forgotten to fall. Wind roared in his ears, then cut off as abruptly as it had begun. He was still standing, but the world around him had changed. The weirwood remained, its pale trunk and red leaves, but beyond it there was no snow, no forest. Instead, black towers reared against a sky thick with ash. Glowing rivers wound between them, casting restless light. Dragons spiraled overhead, wings churning the air. Old Valyria loomed just beyond the tree, as if the godswood had grown a second world on the far side of its roots. "Jon," a voice said, close and far at once. He turned. Bran Stark sat in his wheeled chair beside the weirwood, though Jon had not seen him a moment before. The boy, no longer such a boy, though time touched him strangely, wore heavy furs, his dark hair stirring in a wind Jon could not feel. "Bran," Jon said, relief and unease tangling in his throat. Bran's eyes were milky, unfocused, yet they saw more than most sharp ones ever would. "I told Sansa Stark the ravens might not be enough," Bran said calmly. "You've never been good at listening to ink." "Always preferred people," Jon answered, because this conversation, nightmare though it was, felt easier if it could be nudged toward the familiar. "Not sure you still count as people. Sitting in trees looking at everything." A faint curve touched Bran's mouth. "I'm still your brother." Jon glanced past him at the city looming over the weirwood's shoulder. "Have you come to drag me into that?" "I've come to show you what will happen if you do not go," Bran said. The weirwood's leaves rustled, though there was no wind. The city beyond flickered, scenes shifting like reflections in disturbed water. Jon saw ships burning on a red sea, their masts black sticks against a sky full of wings. He saw men in armor of black and red marching under banners that showed dragons with too many heads, their faces hard and proud. He saw a council chamber of obsidian and gold, where pale, sharp-featured lords argued in High Valyrian while maps of Westeros and Essos lay spread before them. "How much of that is certain?" Jon asked quietly. "None," Bran said. "All. The threads of time are not fixed, but some are stronger than others. Old Valyria remembers the world as it was. It wants that world back. Without a hand to change its grip, it will close its fist and crush whatever does not fit." "And you think that hand is mine?" "I know it is," Bran replied. "You are fire and ice both. You have stood against the dead and the living. You don't want power, which means, for a time, you might be trusted with it." Jon laughed once, a short, rough sound. "You sound like Tyrion Lannister." "He sounds like me," Bran said without arrogance. Ghost edged closer, fur bristling, eyes fixed on the city. Jon could feel the direwolf's unease, as if their shared link were a taut thread humming with tension. "I won't be their king," Jon said. "I won't sit on thrones or wear crowns or lead Dragonlords. The last time I stood between a dragon and the world, it cost too much." Bran's face did not change. "I am not asking thee to be their king," he said. "I am asking thee to look a waking power in the eye and decide whether it will be enemy or ally. To make sure that if Old Valyria rises, it does not do so on a mountain of bones." "And if I refuse?" Jon asked. Bran looked past him, to where the city pulsed faintly. "Then the hand that shapes it will be another's," he said. "Someone who wants it. Someone who thinks the world owes them for its lack of dragons." The images in the air shifted again. Jon saw shadows of faces. Some he knew, some he did not. A young woman in bravos with violet eyes and a faint smile. A priest in Volantis, eyes bright with fevered faith. Lords in Pentos and Lys, their chins lifted with practiced disdain. All threads, all possibilities. He saw himself briefly, standing on a high balcony, dragons wheeling below. Then the image shattered. "You deserve peace," Jon, Bran said, and this time there was pity in his voice. But the world rarely gives us what we deserve, only what we are willing to take. Jon looked at the city once more. It seemed to lean toward him slightly, its towers, its bridges, its fire, like a beast scenting prey or supplicant. It was beautiful and terrible and impossibly old. I said once I didn't want it, Jon murmured. Any of it. And you will say it again, Bran replied. But the choice will still be yours to make. Come south, talk to your sisters, talk to Davos Seaworth. Then decide. The warmth beneath Jon's palm faded. The vision cracked, light splintering like ice under too many feet. For a moment, Jon glimpsed the shadow of his own reflection in the weirwood's eyes, doubled, one wrapped in furs, the other in black and red. Then the world snapped back. He stood once more in the shallow hollow, snow under his boots, ghost pressed against his side. The weirwood's bark was cold beneath his hand. The aurora shifted overhead, the red stain smearing and reforming. Jon let out a breath he had not known he was holding. South, he said quietly to Ghost. He wants me to go south. Ghost huffed, the sound neither assent nor protest. Jon felt, faintly, the shape of the direwolf's thoughts. Danger, fire, pack. I always come back, Jon said. Or I have so far. Let's hope the pattern holds. Letters arrived in Volantis every day. Petitions, threats, contracts inked in careful hands that thought distance lent safety. Most went to clerks and counters, to the quiet army of scribes who kept the Maegor holdings running as smoothly as the tides. The one in Valyria Maegor's hand had not come with the others. It had been delivered by a boy with cracked heels and quick eyes, who had slipped past the household guards with the ease of a fish in a crowded stream. He had presented the tube of black glass without a word, his gaze flicking once to the pale vial hanging at Valyria's throat, a keepsake of obsidian her grandfather had always insisted she wear. When she unstoppered the tube, the parchment inside had slid out like a shed skin. The seal that held it closed bore a sigil she did not recognize. A dragon with two heads, wings spread, its tails entwined. The wax was the color of old blood. She had broken it at once, fingers strangely steady. Lady Valyria Maegor, the letter had begun, in elegant High Valyrian script. The city remembers. The mother of cities wakes and calls her children home. It spoke of towers rising from the sea, of bridges reforged, of dragons circling, their shadows like omens on the boiling waters. It spoke of bloodlines forgotten in exile, of names that had once meant something in the freehold. Maegor, it said, had once sat among them. The family's flight across the sea had not erased their ties. If anything, it had preserved them. We invite you, it concluded, to send a representative to the Conclave of Fire, to be held in the heart of Old Valyria. The city has risen. It is time for her lords and ladies to rise with her. There was no signature, only a final symbol, pressed into the parchment at the bottom. A stylized tower, ringed with flames. Now Valyria stood on her balcony with the letter folded in her hand, watching the long bridge stretch across the black walls, its arches lit with hundreds of tiny lights. Traders and slaves moved along it in ragged processions, their figures small against the massive stone. From here, the city looked almost serene. Another invitation, her steward asked softly from the doorway. He was an older man, his hair gone mostly to gray, his eyes sharp and kind. The Triarch's bidding for your support again. No, Valyria said. This is different. She did not show him the letter. Not yet. It felt like something that needed to sit under her skin a while before she could let other eyes touch it. Out beyond the harbor, where the river met the sea, the sky darkened. The faint red smear on the horizon seemed larger tonight, or perhaps she was simply more aware of it. It had been there for days now, a ghost color lingering after sunset, as if the world had decided to bleed in that one direction and nowhere else. She lifted the letter slightly, feeling its weight. It seemed too light for the burden it carried. My grandfather used to tell stories, she said quietly, more to herself than to the steward, of how our house once walked streets of black glass and spoke commands dragons obeyed. I thought he was trying to make our counting houses seem less dull to a child. She huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. Perhaps he was only remembering. The doom burned all that away, the steward said. The old stories say there was nothing left but fire and ash and broken stone. The old stories are changing, Valyria replied. She could feel it in her bones, the same way she had in her dreams. The letter's words seemed to hum against her fingers, in rhythm with something deep and slow far beneath her feet. She thought of the line in the letter that had unsettled her most. The city remembers, as if Old Valyria were not merely a place but a mind. One that had slept for centuries and was now opening its eyes. You will answer them, then? Her steward asked. Valyria looked east, toward the unseen city whose call scratched at the edges of her thoughts. I will send someone, she said. A cousin, perhaps. A man with enough Mager blood to make the city listen. And I will watch. Fear coiled in her chest, but so did a strange, fierce excitement. For generations, her family had hidden the remnants of their past in cupboards and tapestries, in half-whispered stories. Old Valyria had been both shame and pride to them. A lost homeland they could not quite claim without inviting suspicion. Now that homeland was rising from the sea and sending letters. Valyria's fingers tightened around the parchment until the edges bit into her skin. Whatever this conclave of fire becomes, she murmured, the Magers will not be absent. Old blood does not stay quiet forever. The Red Temple had never lacked for heat, but tonight it seemed as if the fires burned with a hunger of their own. Benero stood before the largest brazier, sweat trickling down his spine under his layered robes. The flames reached higher than they had in years, tongues of orange and white and the occasional eerie blue licking at the air. The roar of it filled his ears, drowning out the murmured prayers of the gathered faithful. Kinvara watched from his right, her profile lit sharp by the blaze. Her eyes, always keen, were narrowed now, reflecting the shapes that moved within the fire. They had both seen odd flickers in the flames in recent nights, far-off towers, the suggestion of wings. At first Benero had taken them for symbols, metaphors offered by a god fond of riddles. The more he watched, however, the more the images sharpened, stubbornly literal. Tonight, there was no mistaking them. Old Valyria, he breathed, as black spires resolved themselves clearly in the heart of the brazier. The mother of cities. The vision shifted, perspective sliding. For a moment they seemed to hover above a vast, boiling sea, towers thrusting up from the water like the ribs of some massive beast. Lava flowed along carved channels, dragons wheeled and screamed and dove. Then the view turned again, dizzying. A man stood on an obsidian bridge, the city at his back, a great void dropping away at his feet. He wore furs and black leather, both north and south in his clothing. Longclaw hung at his side, though the priests did not know the sword's name. A direwolf white as snow pressed against his leg. A man of ice and fire, Kinvara said softly. Benero nodded, throat constricting. He had seen this man before in other flames, once standing on a wall of ice, black-clad and beleaguered. Once in a castle's courtyard, sword dripping red, eyes full of grief. Once in a shattered throne room, cradling the body of a woman with silver hair while a dragon keened in the ruins above. Jon Snow, Jon Targaryen, the Lord's chosen instrument, or one of them. You said he had passed beyond the wall, Kinvara continued, that his work was done, that his fire had been spent. I said he had given much, Benero corrected, eyes not leaving the vision. The Lord of Light does not waste tools that still have edge. The image in the flames split. On one side, Old Valyria loomed, its towers leaning inward like listeners. On the other, a snow-heavy forest stretched beneath a sky lit by auroras, a weirwood bleeding red into the white. The man stood squarely between them, shoulders set, as if he could hold both worlds apart by will alone. The city wakes, Benero murmured, and it calls to him. The flames flared brighter, heat washing over his face. He smelled ash and salt, felt the brush of unseen wings. Then he must be there, Kinvara said. It was not a question. Yes, Benero answered. Someone must go to him, remind him that his choices matter still, that the Lord of Light's work is not yet finished. Kinvara's mouth curved in something that was not quite a smile. I have walked halfway across the world for prophesied men before, she said. I can walk a little farther. You will find him beyond the wall, Benero said. Or in the north. The future phrase there, I cannot see precisely. But wherever he is, the fire will know him. He reached into the brazier and snatched up a burning brand with a suddenness that made the onlookers gasp. The flames licked at his skin but did not burn. Take this. Kinvara stepped forward, solemn, and accepted the brand. The fire along its length dimmed to embers, then brightened again, a steady, unnatural glow that did not consume the wood. The world rewrites its stories, Benero said. Old Valyria, once devoured by flame, now rises anew. The north, once silent, now speaks with a dead god's voice. We must make sure the Lord of Light's chapter is not cut short. Kinvara inclined her head. I will find Jon Snow, she said. And if he shies from the path, I will remind him what waits when men of destiny turn away. She left the temple that night with the brand cradled carefully, its glow hidden under heavy cloth. Outside, the first hint of winter's breath drifted along the river, mingling with the distant scent of the sea. Far to the west, beyond the reach of both Red Temple and Triarchs, a man with a dire wolf weighed a letter and a vision against the quiet life he had carved from snow. Leaving the wall a second time was harder than the first. The first had been a flight, not a choice. Chains on his wrists, the weight of murder on his shoulders, the shattered dream of a world rebuilt without him. He had ridden north then with numb fingers and a mind too full of ghosts. Now he stood at the edge of the camp he had helped shape, a cluster of hide tents, sleds, and rough-hewn lean-tos that had grown and shrunk with the seasons, and felt every eye on him. You don't have to do this, Tormund Giantsbane said for the third time. Old Valyria can rise and fall and dance in the bloody sky for all I care. We've fought enough wars for men in distant halls. Jon adjusted the strap of the pack slung over his shoulder. This isn't their war yet, he said. It might be everyone's, if we leave it long enough. And you think they'll listen to me? Tormund asked, beard bristling. These Dragonlords from drowned cities? Fancy folk who used to ride beasts big as castles? You think you march in there with your brooding and your long sword and they'll bow and say, "Oh yes, Jon Snow, whatever you say." I don't know what they'll do, Jon admitted. But Bran Stark thinks they'll come whether we ask them to or not. I'd rather meet something halfway than wait for it to march over us. Tormund spat into the snow. Sounds like king's talk. Jon almost smiled. I'm no king. Tell that to the bloody city that can't stop dreaming about me. Tormund jerked his chin toward the stained horizon. You died for Trishia lands. You bled for them. Don't owe the world a damned thing. Maybe not, Jon said. But I owe my family. If this thing touches them, and I had a chance to stand in its path and didn't. He shook his head. I can't live with that. The free folk huddled nearby shifted, their mutters carrying faintly in the thin air. Some looked angry, some merely resigned. A few, mostly the younger ones who had grown up hearing stories of Jon Snow who rode with giants and slew dead things, looked at him with something like awe. You'll come back? One girl asked suddenly, stepping forward. She could not have seen 10 summers. Her hair was a wild tangle under a too large fur hood, her nose red with cold. If I can, Jon said. Bring us tales, an older woman called. Not just battles. The world keeps spitting out wonders, and we never see most of them. Tormund huffed. If he comes back with tales of riding dragons over black cities, I'll throw him in the nearest snowbank and leave ta there. Won't help, Jon said. I always crawl out. He stepped forward and, before his courage could falter, clasped Tormund's forearm. The wildling's grip was crushing, his eyes unexpectedly bright. You leave me short one grumpy crow, Tormund said roughly. Bad for morale. Good for my liver, maybe. Keep them safe, Jon said. The free folk. They're yours now more than mine. They were never yours, the idiot, Tormund said. You just convinced them you weren't completely useless. Near the broken arch where the wall had once loomed unbroken, a small party waited. Men in black cloaks, some with new faces, some old. Castle Black survived in a diminished form. The Night's Watch a shadow of its former self, but it still held the gate. Some habits did not die, even when the things they had been built to keep at bay were gone. The leader of the party, a rangy man with frost in his beard and the Watch's badge onto the chest, stepped forward as Jon approached. "Lord Snow," he said, then corrected himself quickly. "Jon Snow, the king sent word. Says you may be coming south. Says we're to help me how we can." "Just Jon," Jon said. "I'm done with titles." The ranger's mouth twitched. "Titles are never done with me, though." Ghost trotted ahead, nose lifted, catching scents that had not been common for years. Oiled leather, castle smoke, men drilled into discipline instead of shaped by pure necessity. He looked back once, as if to be sure Jon followed. Jon did. He did not look over his shoulder until he reached the threshold of the gate. When he did, he saw the free folks' camp already dissolving into motion. Tents taken down, goods loaded, the great migration beginning anew. They would not wait around like a rooted village to see what came next. They had learned better. Tormund raised a hand. Jon returned the gesture, then stepped under the arch, back into a world of stone and orders and ravens. The wall loomed above him still, broken but vast, its ice scar catching the pale morning light. It had been built to keep things out. Now, Jon thought he was walking through it to invite something in. The sea between Eastwatch and White Harbor was not kind, but it was honest. It rose and fell, hurled spray into men's faces, shoved ships about like toys. It did not pretend to be anything but a restless, hungry thing. Jon Snow preferred it to still water these days. At least you knew where you stood with waves that tried to throw you overboard. The Night's Watch ship, refitted with scrounged timbers and sails patched more times than Jon could count, heaved under his boots as it cut through the chop. The wind knifed through his cloak, bringing with it the tang of salt and the faint, metallic edge of distant ice. Rangers moved around him, their motions efficient if not quite as crisp as the old guards had been. The Watch was smaller now, more ragged, a stray collection of second sons, reformed criminals, and men who simply preferred the emptiness of the far north to the crowded politics of the south. But they still knew enough to reef a sail and tie a knot. Ghost pressed against the rail, ears pricked forward, nose lifting toward the eastern horizon. Jon followed the direwolf's gaze. Even here, halfway between wall and north, the sky to the east bore that persistent smear of red. It was fainter in daylight, washed out by the high, pale sun, but it was there. A line along the world's edge, as if someone had drawn it with a coal-dipped finger. "Never seen light like that before," the ranger at Jon's shoulder muttered. He was younger than Jon by a decade, his cheeks still smooth under the frost. "Not for so long. You think it's dragons, truly?" "I've seen dragons," Jon said. "They cast different shadows. But the city that calls them..." He shook his head. "I don't know what it does to the sky." The boy licked chapped lips. "You fought beside dragons," he said. "And against them." "Yes. And the dead. And a mad queen. And now you're going to talk to a ghost city." The ranger huffed, as if trying to turn fear into mockery. "You ever think the gods might be using me for their own amusement?" "More often than I'd like," Jon replied. The boy's laugh was shaky but real. He moved away to help lash down a shifting crate. Jon stayed where he was, fingers curled around the railing. He thought of the dream on the bridge, of lava's heat against his skin, of the dragon hanging in the air before him, eyes burning with something that might have been knowledge. He thought of Bran's steady, distant gaze, of the weirwood's carved face. He thought of Sansa's letter and the careful edge under her words, of Arya's likely smirk when she heard he was being dragged back into stories again. He had not seen either of them in years. He had told himself he kept away for their sake as much as his own, that his presence only complicated their hard-won peace. Now the world had pushed him onto a ship sailing toward them, as if his attempts at distance had been little more than a child hiding under a table during a storm. Your quiet ghost seemed to say without words, the sense of the direwolf pressing against the edges of Jon's thoughts. Not a complaint, merely an observation. I'm thinking, Jon answered inwardly. Dangerous habit. The ship rose and fell. Spray stung Tada cheeks. The wind clawed at his hair. Somewhere beneath them, unseen currents tugged and twisted, indifferent to men and their wars and their waking cities. If Old Valyria truly was rising, if it truly meant to reach out a hand toward the world it had once tried to own, no amount of brooding on a ship's bow would change that. What Jon could change, perhaps, was whether that hand clenched into a fist or opened in something like an offer. He had never been much for speeches. He preferred a clear threat, a simple promise, a thing he could point a sword at. Cities and prophecies could not be cut down. They had to be endured, negotiated, shaped. Not my strengths, he murmured. Yet the world seemed to keep asking anyway. The wind shifted. For just a moment, a faint warmth brushed Tada's face, utterly out of place in the northern chill, carrying with Tada the barest hint of ash. Jon's fingers tightened on the rail. The city was far away yet, half a world between them. And still, somehow, it reached. Winterfell smelled the same. Smoke and snow and damp stone. The faint tang of horses and boiled leather. The earthy undercurrent of the godswood. Jon Snow felt the sense curl around him as he stepped down from the cart, carrying him back in time even as the years sat heavy on his shoulders. The walls rose around the courtyard, familiar teeth of gray stone. New repairs gleamed here and there where dragons and war had bitten chunks away, but the bones were the same. The great tower loomed, banners hanging heavy in the still air. The gray direwolf of House Stark snapping lazily, the crowned stag and leaping wolf of Bran Stark's united rule above it. Snow fell in light flakes, catching in Ghost's fur as the direwolf trotted ahead, nostrils flaring. He circled once, as if to confirm that the castle he remembered still stood, then returned to Jon's side with an almost smug air. People stared. Servants with bundles of firewood in their arms, stable boys with straw clinging to their hair, guards in thick cloaks with spears resting against their shoulders. Some recognized him at once, mouths falling open. Others, younger, saw only a dark-haired man in plain leathers, a sword at his side, a great white wolf at his heels, and narrowed their eyes warily. A shout went up from near the steps leading to the keep. Jon looked up. Sansa Stark was descending, the wind tugging at the edges of her cloak. She wore dark blue wool lined with fur, a silver clasp at her throat shaped like a direwolf's head. Her hair, longer now, was bound in intricate braids, threaded with small strips of leather. Snow melted on her lashes as she came down, but her gait was steady, her back straight. For a heartbeat, Jon saw another woman in her place. Taller, colder, with silver hair and dragons on her shoulders. The memory flickered and was gone. This was his sister, not his queen. Behind her, Arya Stark slipped down the steps, almost more shadow than flesh. Her leathers were worn, her boots muddy, needle a familiar line at her hip. Her face, as ever, was harder to read than Sansa's, but Jon caught the flash of something like relief in her eyes. He moved forward without realizing it. "Jon," Sansa said, stopping at the last step. Her voice did not carry loudly, but the courtyard fell quiet all the same. "Sansa," he replied, up close. He could see the differences the years had drawn on her. Fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a small scar near her jaw he did not remember. She looked stronger than he had ever seen her, and more tired. "You look older," she said. "So do me," he answered, and something, tension, grief, the brittle restraint of letters and distant rumors, cracked between them. Sansa stepped down the last stair and closed the distance, arms going around him with a force that stole his breath. For a moment, Jon stood stiff, caught between surprise and an old, cautious shame. Then his own arms lifted and closed around her, pulling her close, burying his face in her hair as he had done once when he had been a boy about to leave for the wall. She trembled just once. He felt it. "I thought," she began, voice muffled into a cloak, then cut herself off. "It doesn't matter." You're here. Arya waited a moment, then shouldered in, wrapping both of them in an awkward, tight-limbed embrace that one of the watching guards would later swear looked more like a tackle. You take your time, don't ye? She muttered into Jon's shoulder. World keeps trying to end and ye wander off into the snow. I always come back, Jon said, the words tasting strange and right on his tongue. When they stepped apart, the courtyard sounds trickled back. Someone clearing a throat, a horse snorting, the creak of a saddle. Jon saw the watching faces shift, suspicion giving way to something else. These were their lord's kin, embracing like survivors, not strangers. You got my letter, Sansa said, her eyes already sliding toward the Night's Watch Rangers, the ship's men, the work waiting to be done. I did, Jon replied, and more than that, Bran came to me. He glanced toward the Godswood, where the ancient heart tree's branches clawed at the sky. Through the trees, Sansa's lips pressed together. Of course he did. She gestured, and a servant hurried forward to take Jon's pack. Ghost barred his teeth at the man until Jon laid a calming hand on the direwolf's neck. You're home, Sansa said. For as long as you can be. Her gaze sharpened. But you know we didn't call me here only to talk about old times. I know, Jon said. His eyes drifted, unbidden, to the faint red stain visible even here, low on the horizon beyond the walls. The world's waking up strange again. The king will speak with me, Sansa said. But first come inside. Warm yourself. Then he can tell us what you've seen in your dreams. Arya fell into step beside him as they crossed the courtyard. Didn't he at least kill anything interesting up there? She asked. Snow bears with 2 heads? Ice spiders the size of direwolves? Just elk, Jon said. And ghosts from the past. Boring, Arya said. But her eyes softened when she glanced at Ghost. At least he kept the right kind of ghost. The great hall door loomed ahead. Beyond it waited firelight and food, and a king who sat in a chair that was not a throne and saw a world of burning cities. Beyond it waited questions Jon did not yet know how to answer. He paused with a hand on the iron ring, feeling the old stone under his boots, the familiar weight of his sword at his side, the solid presence of his sisters at his back. For the first time since the city of his dreams had called to him, he felt something like steadiness. Whatever Old Valyria wanted, whatever the dragons in its sky sought, he would face it from here, from the place that had made him, with the people who had refused to let the world forget him entirely. Let's talk about waking cities, Jon Snow said quietly, and pushed the door open.